I'm Trey Kay, and you're listening to Us and Them.
Who is a miner in this group? Who is a stand-up? You're all standing up anyway.
That's Donald Trump campaigning in West Virginia.
You're amazing people, and we're going to take care of a lot of years of horrible abuse, okay? We're going to take, and you can count on it. You can count on it, 100%.
At one point, he put on a white hard hat. The people behind him are cheering and waving signs that say things like, Trump digs coal.
We're going to put the miners back to work. We're going to put the miners back to work. We're going to get those mines open. Oh, coal country.
Us and Them is a show about seeing the same story two ways. And nothing calls out for that treatment more than coal in West Virginia. Today I'm going to introduce you to three guys from West Virginia who see coal in completely different ways. One guy says coal has been the lifeblood of West Virginia's workers. Another guy says coal mining is why so many people in West Virginia are poor. And the third, well, he suggests the conversation needs to change. That it's no longer just about coal, but the energy newcomer, natural gas, and how the state positions itself for the future. Talking with all these guys got me thinking about my own connections to coal. My grandfather worked in a mine. My mom remembers him coming home and looking like he walked out of one of those iconic photographs. You know, with the whites of his eyes shining out from a jet black face covered in coal dust. And on my dad's side, there's my great-great-great-uncle James Kay, the owner of the Kaymore Mine. I've known about this mine all my life. I've even floated past it on a whitewater rafting trip. But you can't see that mine from the water. So I thought it was time for a closer look. It's a great path.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a nice path, but it's not easy to walk.
I asked my friend Stan Baumgartner to come along.
I mean, you can see how steep it is, and we're probably not halfway to where the mine site would have been yet. And they had to figure out how to get millions of tons of coal out of here and get the miners in and out of this place. That's pretty challenging.
Stan knows a lot about the history of coal mining and the history of West Virginia.
I'm the editor of Golden Seal magazine, which is the state magazine of traditional life history. And for the last 25 years, I've been a professional historian one way or another.
And I'm noting that as we walk down this path, I've got hiking shoes on, and you've got...
I'm not wearing shoes. I walk barefoot in the woods a lot. And, the worst thing you get there is some briars and some nettles. But around historic sites, you probably should wear some heavy-soled shoe because they're, man-made things, nails, screws, sawed planks, parts of roofs. They get left behind and they can get in your feet, and I've had that happen. So I'm not going to encourage what I'm doing, but I love being barefoot in the woods in West Virginia.
So where are we?
We're in the New River Gorge, which is kind of our little mini Grand Canyon of the Appalachians. And the National Park Service has come in and they've preserved a lot of the area that used to be coal mines. I think there were 80-some coal mines in the New River Gorge at one point. I mean, now we look at it as kind of a beautiful area, and it's, there's people whitewater rafting and rock climbing and hiking. But if we were here 100 years ago, we wouldn't be able to see to the other side probably. There would have been so much smoke and really smog coming out from the coal mines and the coke ovens and everything else that you wouldn't be able to see or even hear.
We're hiking down to the abandoned mine.
There's a Kaymore top and there's a Kaymore bottom.
Kaymore bottom is about 1,000 feet below us. There were more than 100 houses down there back when the mines were operating in this valley. A pulley system ran up and down the gorge, sort of like a chairlift on a ski hill. It hauled coal and people up and down this incredibly steep hill between Kaymore bottom and Kaymore top.
What can you tell us about why it's called Kaymore?
Well, it's named after one of your relatives. Was it your great uncle, James Kay?
Actually, I did a little research before this. I think he was my great uncle.
From everything I know about him, he was kind of he kind of worked himself up from having nothing. He was born in Scotland, and I think he comes to the United States after the Civil War. He's his early 20s. By trade, he's an engineer. He can build roads, he can engineer things, and he helped build a lot of the bridges and archways that go through the whole area, because there's so many areas the railroad had to cross rivers, and he was pretty much a genius at it. And then he built his money up, and he was able to buy some land.
Stan's family has coal stories. My family has coal stories. Lots of families in West Virginia have coal stories.
I mean, at one point there were, I think it was 1948, there were something like 125,000 people employed in the coal mining industry.
But the number of people working in West Virginia's coal industry has been falling for a long time.
Beginning in the 1920s, coal was overproduced and the value started dropping, market value dropped, and there were a lot of layoffs and a lot of depression in coal towns. Coal towns started shutting up then. And then you have a little bit of a peak in the 1940s again during World War II, specifically because of that. And then by the 1950s, with the end of the war and mechanization in the industry, I mean, the bottom falls out of it, and literally probably 100 towns just disappear. I mean, they become ghost towns within years, and Kmore's one of those.
At the opening of the Kmore mine, there's still a faded sign that says, "Your family wants you to work safely." I stood underneath that sign for a few minutes, and I could feel myself slip back in time. I could imagine the noise and the bustle of the mines. I thought of my relatives. On my dad's side, the mine owner, James Kay, a brilliant engineer who built this mine and that pulley system. And on my mom's side, her dad, Dick Jones, who carried his lunch pail into a different mine and dug the coal. Even though my family has ties to coal, I didn't think about it much when I was growing up in Charleston. I was a city kid. My dad was a lawyer. I had a vague sense that coal was a big deal to the West Virginia economy. There was this television ad. Coal is West Virginia. I'm sure everyone who grew up in West Virginia in the 1970s can sing that jingle. But coal was pretty distant from my day-to-day life. And the kids that I went to school with didn't talk about going to work in that industry. But I did know at least one guy in Charleston who wanted to work in coal.
My name is Andrew Jordan, and I own coal mining companies in West Virginia.
Andrew's driving me up to a coal mine that his company operates just outside of Charleston.
Pritchard Mining Company is is the first company that we started, 25, 30 years ago. Yeah.
We both grew up in Charleston, and back in the day, Andrew and I went to the same high school, George Washington. Everybody calls it GW.
It was up this hollow where I first went to work.
Andrew got his first coal mining job right after he graduated from GW, and just before he went to Penn State to study mining engineering. That summer before college, he worked in the mine safety department.
It was good. Great big coal mine, and they're still mining coal in that mine today. And that was in 1977.
What did your parents think when you said, I'm 18, I'm going to go just get this job mining coal? What did they think of that?
They didn't mind it. My mom's father was owned a Chrysler dealership in Charleston, but he also owned some small coal mines. So she'd been around it, and then the generation that was really active in it was my great-grandfather.
Here's one impression that strikes me as I listen to Andrew. He genuinely enjoys mining. He seems happiest when he's out on the work site in Carhartts and steel-toed boots.
But I can wear the suit if I have to because I've been chairman.
Andrew's really involved in the community government in Charleston. He sits on the board for CURA, the Charleston Urban Renewal Authority. And he's been the chairman of the West Virginia Chamber of Commerce and the chairman of the State Coal Association.
I go to the state capitol and lobby on behalf of our industry. So I can wear a coat and tie and a suit when I want to, or when it's necessary, but I'd just soon not to. I prefer doing this. I like running equipment. You know, I try and run a piece of equipment at least, 4 or 5 times a week.
Andrew takes me up the mountain where his crews are working today. Some guys are driving around in dump trucks as tall as 2-story buildings. Other guys are drilling into the mountain to insert explosives.
This is the active area. This is where they're getting ready to blow things up. This is where we chisel the mountain down. Every level where it looks like there's a little flat, that's where coal seam is. Okay?
Later that afternoon, they'll clear everyone out and set off a blast. That'll expose more of the seam, where they'll dig up the coal.
Hey, Ed. So, hold on, Ed.
We also stop in a spot that's no longer being mined. Now it's a field of soft green grass. At the edge of the field, the mountain begins a steep decline into a hillside thick with trees. Andrew tells me that people have mined this location for years, long before his company started mining on this mountain.
So this what was a mountain? I mean, how much did we reduce it from the top?
We didn't.
Elevation?
We're back to the same level it was.
How did you do that?
Well, you put the material, but you build it back up. The material it's a constant. This is like a big road construction job, but we're held to put the material back to the approximate original contour. So it has to be brought back to the same level.
Andrew talks a lot about rebuilding the mountain, about planting trees. In the mining world, that's called reclamation. And Andrew says the big mining companies didn't do it.
This whole thing was being mined when we were kids. And there was no reclamation. There wasn't any laws. They just came along here with the dozer and whatever they could gouge out, get the coal, and never come back. They just leave it, That was going on when we were growing up. Here, where we're riding around. And now we're cleaning it up. This was just a little stream. This was a small stream.
For the podcast, you can say if you want.
And we did a lot of work on this stream, enhancing it for fish and wild, aquatic life.
How much do you cross swords with environmentalists, and how often does that happen?
Well, in my career of owning my own operations, I've been sued twice, and it's by the same environmentalist, and it's just basically the guy I grew up with.
Joe Lovett?
Yeah, Joe.
He was in your high school class.
And I would still consider Joe Lovett a friend of mine. Joe grew up 4 or 5 houses up the street from me. I mean, we at that time were very, very close friends, and I would still consider Joe a friend. But he looks at coal mining and fossil fuels differently than I do.
Now, what kind of lawyer would sue their childhood buddy who never did anything to harm them personally?
I'm Joe Lovett, Executive Director of Appalachian Mountain Advocates, a nonprofit law and policy center that works in West Virginia, Kentucky, and Tennessee.
I know Joe too. I've known him for years. Our dads were really good friends. They were both lawyers.
Right, they were pals, and I think did a few cases together as well.
I'm a few years younger than Joe and Andrew, so we weren't really good friends when we were kids. But Joe says that he and Andrew spent a lot of time together.
I grew up down the street from Andrew, and we were friends all the way through school. I played a lot of football on his yard and hung out at his house quite a bit. So yeah, we were definitely good friends.
He told me that he's only been sued twice for his work, and that both suits came from your organization.
Well, I think we've only sued him once. I think we sued the Army Corps of Engineers to stop a permit that he was trying to get. And that probably felt to him like we were suing him because, in effect, it would have stopped a mine that he was trying to permit. And then recently, the organization that I work for and the organization that I run, to be honest, has sued his company for water pollution problems. And, there's obviously some personal misgiving about that. But
What do you mean?
well, it's hard. It's hard to sue somebody who you know. It's easy to sue a publicly traded big company like Alpha or Arch. I mean, they're shareholders mostly in St. Louis or Richmond or New York or wherever. But Andrew and his family have been in this region for a very long time, and the money gets spent here. Like I say, it's much easier to sue a faceless entity when you know that all the money especially is leaving the region.
Joe didn't plan on becoming an environmental lawyer. He didn't plan on staying in West Virginia. After high school, he went away to college.
I left, didn't really intend to come back.
He ended up in law school at UPenn. But during a couple of those summer vacations, he came back to West Virginia to work at the Appalachian Research and Defense Fund.
Otherwise known as Apple Red.
And Joe really liked being back. So when he finished his law degree in the 90s, he moved to West Virginia to work in a new organization called Mountain State Justice, which needed an environmental lawyer.
I graduated from law school and I clerked for a judge, but I didn't really know the first thing about environmental law.
But he dug in, and he became the only environmental lawyer in West Virginia.
Nobody was doing environmental law in West Virginia. I mean, there just wasn't anything going on. When I started out, honestly, I was in the first case we had, there were like 14 lawyers on the other side of the case, and there was me. It's true that West Virginia is completely dominated by coal. There's just nothing like it. Our land is owned by out-of-state land-owning companies that work with coal companies to exploit the land. It's happened for decades. On the other hand, West Virginians generally are close to the land, and the people here understand how important the land is. So my client is usually Sierra Club or some group of people often from out of the state. But they really don't understand on a day-to-day basis, what coal mining has done to the communities in which it occurs. And the people that live there know.
So here's something Joe and Andrew agree on. Folks from outside don't get it. They don't understand how deeply coal is ingrained into the life of people in West Virginia.
Coal mining in West Virginia is a culture.
This is Andrew again.
There's a lot of people that have done it for generations, and their dads and their grandfathers, and they lived in the same hollows that they've lived in all their lives. There has been downturns in the coal industry since coal mining started. But if you talk to a lot of the people that have been in the business for a long, long time, they'll all tell you that this is the worst they've ever seen it. They talk about, bringing money in to retrain coal miners. Well, here in West Virginia, because we don't have a diverse economy, what are you going to train them to do? They've been generations of coal miners, and they don't want to do anything else. All they want to do is go back to work. They don't want to check. They don't want a government handout. I mean, they'll take it in order to eat and exist. But, I mean, they just want to go back to work. And, most of the guys that work for me that are laid off would say the same thing. They just want to go back to work. And that's what I want to do, is I want to put them back to work. And I want to be able to mine coal in a responsible manner going forward to supply the energy that drives the economy of the United States.
There's no doubt that when we grew up, coal was king in the state, right? It was king coal, everything was about coal.
This is Joe again.
All the big players here are gone. They all went bankrupt. Alpha and Patriot, by far the two biggest surface miners in this region, both went through bankruptcy, and nobody's going to open a new mountaintop removal mine in this region. It just doesn't make sense. The economics aren't there. It would be pouring money down the drain. That's why everybody went bankrupt, took the money, and ran. Think of it this way. The coal industry came here 20 years ago, blew the hell out of our mountains for 15 years, destroyed it, left us a wasteland. Then they all went bankrupt, took their profits out, left West Virginia, a total mess. All of our streams are polluted, and I mean all of them. From surface mining, the forests are gone. So they destroyed the economy, and now it's going to be left that way for decades and with no real hope of recovery. So Andrew's a small operator, right? I mean, he's not like the big guys that were here that were really mining the coal are gone. Andrew mines a tiny amount of coal. And, I'm not saying there won't be a few local operators here mining coal in the future, and Andrew may well be one of those, but it's a pittance. It's a tiny amount. The coal fields, the billion-dollar coal fields, as the sign used to say when you drove into Logan County, West Virginia, are some of the poorest counties in the United States. Coal has been a curse upon this region since it was first mined here. And I think that anybody that looks at it rationally will come to that conclusion. I don't think it's coming back, and I think it's the best thing that ever happened to this region.
I've heard that before.
That's Andrew again.
I disagree with that. I worked for some really good guys that were in the business. I learned a lot from them. There's people like Lawson Hamilton, Buck Harless, Bob Long. These were all independent co-operators that, much like myself, understood the value of giving back to the community. They lived here, they worked here, they employed people here, they banked here. It was very important to them that they do it right. And so mining coal has been very financially good to West Virginia. And we've created a lot of jobs, a lot of support jobs. There's a lot of studies that think that for every one coal mining job, there's probably 8 support jobs. And my biggest concern right now is I think that West Virginia, with this downturn in not only the coal industry, but the natural gas industry as well, that we could lose up to a third of our population. We didn't diversify our economy, and coal carried a lot of the taxes and financed a lot of things in this country, or in West Virginia. And we should have been thinking about that. I mean, I'd love to see diversification. I'd like to see a whole lot of manufacturing power plants come to West Virginia. The more of the plants, the better. Puts more people to work, a better chance that my kids will stay here and live here and work here. And that's what I want. I mean, I want them to have the same passion for West Virginia that I have, and the same desire to live here and raise their family here. But if there's no business here, that it won't happen, And so I want diversification in our economy, and I want more industry here because they're going to burn more electricity.
About a third of the country's electricity is produced by coal. When I started this, by the way, just 20 years ago, it was almost 60%. So it's dropped almost in half since I started. But still, a third of the country's electricity comes from coal, and that has to be mined somewhere.
It's wonderful to say that solar and wind are zero carbon, but they're not base load electricity. You don't have the ability to be able to turn that switch on every time you need it in every part of the country, like you do with nuclear, coal-fired, and natural gas-fired. They are continuous source of electricity. And technology will catch up with that. And down the road, we'll be able to store more of the energy that's generated from windmills and solar panels, but that technology is not there yet. And the materials that are used to build some of those solar panels and batteries are not the friendliest to the environment to mine the minerals that go into that either. So, I mean, our mere existence has an impact. I mean, and we would be naive to think it doesn't. Like I told you, I've planted a lot of trees. I think I'm more of a practicing environmentalist in the things and my employees are, and the things that we've done, and the trees that we've planted, and the messes we've cleaned up, than the guy standing on the corner of Capitol Street holding a sign that says "Stop Mountaintop Removal." We practice it every day.
Coal is the biggest environmental problem in the world. Well, let me strike that. It's certainly one of the top environmental problems in the world. I didn't realize that. When I came back to West Virginia, I had never been on a coal mine, did not think of myself as doing coal work. It just was like when we grew up here, nobody really thought about the environmental implications of coal mining, at least no one I knew. I personally just missed the whole thing until I came back.
Andrew, we met in his office, and then he drove me up to one of the strip mine operations that is not far from, if you're on the West Virginia Turnpike, where the old Memorial Tunnel is, and you go up on that mountain, right? And as we were going by, he had already shown me back in his office photographs of some of the places that they have reclaimed, reforested, that in many ways this has come back, that you would hardly know that mining had gone on there.
So I think Andrew makes an effort to do reclamation better than others do. That's purely anecdotal. I don't have any evidence there. I don't know, but
Andrew says that he's an outdoorsman. He hunts and he fishes, and that he even hunts and fishes, around the area where he mines, and so do his workers.
Sure.
So he says that he and they care for the land and the environment.
Right.
So
I don't doubt that at all. So evidently, mountaintop removal makes turkey and deer hunting easier because it creates these areas where there are edge areas between forests and open areas. But our ecosystem here is not about turkey and deer. That's part of it, but those are parts of the ecosystem, and the parts that people don't notice are what's lost forever. The birds, the insects, our forests, those are gone. I don't doubt that Andrew is an outdoorsman. I just think he doesn't understand what he's doing. I'm sure he thinks the same thing about me, but...
Well, yeah, I think that he would say, and I think that most people would say, is that, Joe Lovett is a guy who is a tree hugger, who cares more about the spotted owl than a guy who is trying to support his family.
Right. So I just looked this up. I couldn't get the exact quote, but the great Upton Sinclair quote: "It is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding it." And that's what's going on here.
And I guess that's kind of the interesting dynamic, is that we have this industry that for 150 years, it's been a big part of our state's economy now, but more when we were growing up. It was hard to be a West Virginian and extricate yourself from the industry.
Not only when we grew up, it has been until now. As I said, I truly believe, I have been here now for 20 years, essentially suing the coal industry, coal-fired power plants and coal mines. And I truly came to see myself as part of the coal industrial complex over that time. I mean it. I was just without them, I wouldn't have had a job. I would have been happy not to have that job, but I was supported by the coal industry. I sued them. When I won, I got money in attorney's fees. That allowed me to hire people and sue them more. So my job was completely, it's not so much now, but until 2 or 3 years ago, was completely tied up with the fortunes of the coal industry.
For the record, my job has been tied to the fortunes of the coal industry too. Let me explain. As I say at the top of every episode, Us and Them is a production of West Virginia Public Broadcasting, which is part of the state of West Virginia, meaning it's funded through state taxes. And the coal industry generates some of that income. Over the last 10 years, West Virginia Public Broadcasting has seen a dramatic decrease in state budget appropriations, partially because of a decline in coal mining revenues. But regardless of coal's lessening contribution to my or Joe Lovett's income, Joe does have some praise for Andrew Jordan being more responsible than some mega corporate coal companies.
Most of the mining that's occurred here has been done by people who never even or rarely come here. So they have no interest in the future of the region. So I have no doubt that Andrew is trying to do a better job than other people are. But Andrew is still putting dirt in water. It's just a fact. He can't mine the way he's doing without putting dirt in water. Think of the mountains, right? Every mountain in West Virginia has streams that start nearly at the top and run down. And Andrew will blow up. That's not just Andrew. A surface mining operator just blows up the whole mountain. And then they try to put it back. But a mountain in West Virginia, before a coal operator gets a hold of it, is typically very steep. Mining spoil can't be put back after a mountain is blown up at that same angle. It's too steep for the soil to stay in place. But because of litigation, they have to put more back on top of the mountain and less goes into the streams below. But they're still putting big amounts of spoil in what were once streams. I don't put Andrew in the category with Alpha, Arch, and Patriot Coal. I'm sure he cares about the state. I think he's completely misguided in what he thinks the proper prescription for the state is. I don't think he could be more wrong, but I don't think that he is in the same category with those other mining companies that I mentioned.
Andrew says that he knew your father quite well and attended his funeral.
And I knew his parents very well. Like I say, our ties go way back.
He says that he still considers you a friend. What about you?
Well, sure. I think that it's I have no bad feelings for Andrew at all. I respect him. I have to be honest, we haven't seen each other very much over the past 20 years. I run into Andrew from time to time. I'm still a friend, but I just want to make it clear. It's not like we hang out together. Not for any reason, except that our lives have gone different ways.
Two West Virginians, a shared account of the past, but two different visions for the future. U.S. Census reports that West Virginia tops the list of states whose population is declining. Andrew Jordan mentioned earlier that he wants West Virginia to maintain its population, and he wants sufficient industry to keep his kids living here. For him, coal holds the promise for that vision. He disagrees with Joe that the coal industry is dead. According to the West Virginia Department of Environmental Protection, more than 40% of the state's rivers are too polluted to be used for drinking water or recreation or to support healthy aquatic life, due to decades of mining. Joe Lovett's priority is to prevent coal extraction from continuing to wreak havoc on West Virginia's environment. He disagrees with Andrew that coal mining can continue in an environmentally responsible way. For this episode, I really wanted to get Andrew and Joe together to talk face to face. They both said that they were willing to do this, but when it got down to trying to actually schedule something, somehow it just never worked out. I was hoping that I could stand with Joe and Andrew on a mountainside that's been mined and reclaimed. I wanted them to look out and tell each other what they saw. But maybe they already understand what the other guy sees, and they just disagree. Coming up after a break, we'll hear from a journalist who's been covering the coal industry for the last 30 years. He says the debate that pits coal's economic growth versus environmental cost is outmoded. He suggests we should be talking about natural gas and whether West Virginia is going to make the same mistakes all over again.
Are we going to develop a better relationship with that industry than we had with coal, or are we going to just follow the same playbook and give them whatever they want in exchange for a little pittance at the end?
That's just after this break. I'm Trey Kay, and this is Us and Them from West Virginia Public Broadcasting and PRX. This show is supported in part by the CRC Foundation and the Daywood Foundation.
In difficult times, music gives us peace, brings us together, and helps heal us. It calms our nerves and brightens our days. That's why we're bringing you classic episodes of Mountain Stage on air and in our podcast. This is Larry Gross, host of Mountain Stage. Find something that's familiar or brand new and feel the power of live music on our website, mountainstage.org.
You're listening to Us and Them. I'm Trey Kay. In the first half of the show, we heard two conflicting points of view about the status of coal right now in West Virginia. One from a mine owner and the other from an environmental lawyer. But I wanted to broaden the conversation and talk with someone who's an outsider to the industry, but who also has a deep knowledge of its history. Ken Ward has been covering the coal industry for the past 30 years for the Charleston Gazette-Mail, and more recently for ProPublica. He's even won a MacArthur Genius Award for his writing about the impact of coal in West Virginia. I asked him which point of view of coal should we consider more strongly, the economic or the environmental? And he says it's not a binary issue. That's why it's so tricky.
Both of those realities can be true. It is true that for a relatively small number of people and families, the coal industry has provided a remarkable standard of living. People who work in coal mines do very well. They're the best paying jobs in their communities. And for an even smaller number of kind of middlemen who run companies for outside interests and are lawyers for those companies, it provides a really good standard of living. But at the same time, it's relatively well understood in the literature that extractive industries create the resource curse, and it inhibits other kinds of economic growth. And at the same time, the coal industry, while providing a good living for workers, is certainly 100,000 coal miners have died. Many, many more continue to die from black lung disease. The coal industry has also left in its wake polluted streams, scarred land, and I think the difficulty for West Virginia is kind of figuring out how to take a relationship like that with an industry and use it to the advantage of a larger number of people. And over more than 100 years of coal mining, we've never really figured that out.
The second tricky question about coal is how much is there left to mine? Ken says the coal industry has intentionally muddled that debate. He says it's created public relations campaigns with false claims. But he says if you look at the facts, it's clear we are running out of coal deposits. And that's partly because the coal industry has been a victim of its own success.
As long as men have been mining coal, the better those miners get at it, the faster they're putting themselves out of a job. The biggest thing that's cost coal mining jobs over the long term, going back to the 30s, the biggest thing that's cost coal miners their jobs is bigger and faster and better machines that will mine all of that coal faster. Kind of the other thing that I always find it kind of interesting is this idea that often is kind of placed into the heads of the discussion by outside media, certainly by politicians, is, coal is West Virginia, and that's all there is. And I heard a young man at a public hearing on a mountaintop removal coal mining issue a number of years ago who drove up to Charleston, West Virginia from eastern Kentucky to talk at this public hearing, and got up and was saying that, if you don't let us mine coal in this manner at a mountaintop removal mine, there's no other future for me. I have no other options. And this was a young man who was in high school. He was getting ready to graduate and wanted to go work in the mines. And for me, the idea that any of us, I'm a parent, my son's 14 years old, I want him to have every option he could possibly have in life. I want him to be able to go do whatever he wants to do with his life. And over time, I've been talking to coal miners as a journalist since I was an intern at the Gazette in 1989. And there's a real shift that I've seen in the rhetoric around this industry. In 1989, when miners were on strike against Pittston Coal, in 1993 during the nationwide contract strike, what you heard from miners was, we're doing this work, and we're striking for a better contract because we want to be able to provide for our families so our kids can go do something else. That's what I consistently heard from coal miners was, I don't want my kid to go work in the mines. I want them to have a better life than this. But today the rhetoric is, this is all we have. And that's really a narrative that's been forced on communities by constant PR ads from the Friends of Coal and the coal associations. And one of the more cynical ploys that you hear out of politicians from the coal fields is this idea that, another big big coal boom is just around the corner. So you don't have to work harder to find other kinds of jobs. You don't have to remake your economy to be more diverse. You don't have to get a better education. None of us have to work hard at finding a more stable future.
When you throw politics into the mix, the debate around coal gets even trickier, especially given how polarized our politics have become. But Ken Ward sees fault in the approaches of both Democrat and Republican administrations when it comes to coal. Of course, President Trump campaigned vigorously as a friend of coal, but Ken has his doubts about the president's sincerity on this issue.
When he wasn't in West Virginia or in Kentucky or in a coal state campaigning for the White House, he gave an interview to Playboy magazine in which he said that he doesn't understand why anybody would stay working in a coal mine, that if people were able, they would leave, but the people that are working there just aren't good enough to be able to do something else. And secondly, what you have to understand is, I think he tweets this every day. Senator Joe Manchin tweets, I think every day, at President Trump and says, I know you love our coal miners, so won't you support some sort of a congressional action to protect the pensions and the health care for 80, 90,000 retired coal miners. I think one has to ask, if that's what's on the line, is those pensions and health care. If Donald Trump cares so much about coal miners, why doesn't he step in on that particular issue? Cecil Roberts, the president of the United Mine Workers, went so far recently as to just say, I would be happy if President Trump would just tweet about our pensions. Because his tweet might get Congress to actually do something about it. So I think that those are the sorts of things you have to look at, and also kind of a third sort of thing that's buried in there about some of this is this kind of nonsensical idea that you hear that, well, if we can just roll back regulations on coal mining, whether it be regulations of water pollution from coal mining or regulations about how safe the workplace has to be, that's the way we'll get the coal industry booming again.
That those are kind of stifling or hamstringing the industry. And if we could just free those fetters, that all of a sudden we're going to have a roaring coal economy.
Yeah, I mean that's So while there are all these different regulations about the coal industry, they're there for a reason. The miners and mine safety advocates like to talk about the fact that all of these safety laws that are on the books are written in blood. And that's the reason that coal is so heavily regulated, because it's an amazingly dangerous industry that can kill a lot of people and do a lot of damage very quickly. One of the things that Donald Trump did for the coal industry was he put a stop to a National Academy of Sciences study that was aimed at looking at the emerging several dozen studies that have been done showing that if you live near a mountaintop removal coal mine, you face increased risk of cancer and birth defects and premature death. And the National Academy was trying to study that work to figure out exactly what was going on and what could be done about it. And the Trump administration, Department of Interior, pulled the funding. And look, understand that there's a lot of voices that are outside of West Virginia, including and some in West Virginia, that are saying, hey, look, let's talk about climate change. And there's an interesting sort of irony in that Senator Manchin likes to talk about how the coal industry helped drive the Industrial Revolution and steel making, and the coal industry helped us win 2 wars and defeat fascism. The electricity from the coal industry has powered the country for a long time, and lots of people who live other places that consider us flyover territory benefited an awful lot from the hard work of those coal miners. People who live in New York and Washington and all over these places that kind of look down upon us certainly benefited greatly from the coal miners who suffered from black lung disease or had their bodies ripped apart in mine explosions or burned to death in a mine fire. And people in those places have benefited from West Virginia kids being left to play in open sewers because they didn't have sewage treatment plants in their town. Or being left with dead streams where the water and the sediment were orange from acid mine drainage. And now those same folks are like, well, gosh, you idiot West Virginians, why are you so set on Donald Trump and burning coal? And why are you want to develop this natural gas industry? because you're destroying the planet for all of us. And I think one of the things that's important for everyone in having that kind of conversation to kind of confront is that, okay, well, if part of this transition involves addressing climate change by dealing with the coal question, well, what are we going to do for these communities? And what are we as a nation willing to do to help provide a just transition for those coal miners and for their communities? Barack Obama, the big, if you believe the Republican socialist president, it was not until late in his second term, his staff had been working very hard trying to come up with, tailpipe emission rules and power plant emission rules and all these things to deal with climate change. But it wasn't until late in his second term that the Obama administration proposed any kind of a plan to provide help for coal communities that were seeing their jobs disappear. That's awful late in a presidency, late in a second term to be offering that sort of thing. What you see now is, if you post a story on Facebook that says, black lung surging again in Appalachia, you're almost certain to get a couple of comments from people who consider themselves big liberals saying, oh, well, they voted for Trump, they get what they deserve. Well, I think one of the things that the country, not just people in Appalachia, but the country has to confront is that West Virginia and coal communities have done a lot for this country. And, maybe those communities need some help now, and what's the country willing to do to help them? Is the only thing we're going to get is let's weaken some environmental regulations so maybe some coal companies can limp along a little longer?
The question of who should benefit from West Virginia's rich resources is not a new one. Ken Ward says as early as 1884, there was a state commission report, and here's the question it posed. Quote, whether the vast wealth shall belong to the persons who live here and who predominantly identify with the future of West Virginia, or whether it should be passed into the hands of persons who do not live here and care nothing for our state except to pocket the treasures which lie buried in our hills. And while coal may be running out, the next energy boom could be natural gas extraction through a process called hydraulic fracturing or fracking. And once again, West Virginia's natural resources are on the table. But journalist Ken Ward worries that local politicians are making the same mistakes all over again.
We're at this point now where the natural gas industry has asked and continues to ask for a number of things from West Virginia that are similar to what we heard historically from the coal industry. Well, we really need you to change this particular environmental regulation, and if you don't, then gosh, we might pick up all our gas rigs and go somewhere else. We need you to not ask too many difficult questions about whether or not the workers that are doing these jobs are being brought in from Oklahoma and Texas, or whether we're hiring local people. Above all, we really need to not increase our taxes too much. And for the natural gas industry, by and large, the biggest producers of natural gas are based in Pittsburgh or in Colorado or Oklahoma City. The biggest owners of mineral wealth are still out-of-state land companies. We're trying to grapple with developing. Are we going to develop a better relationship with that industry than we had with coal, or are we going to just follow the same playbook and give them whatever they want in exchange for a little pittance at the end?
You've been monitoring this industry for 30 some years, and you're an investigative reporter, and part of what investigative reporting does is to really look at the cold hard, sometimes the facts where people are doing wrongdoing, and you have to look under stones. And it's clear that when you steep yourself in swim in these waters, I would imagine that you kind of come away cynical and maybe where you lack hope. And I was wondering, do you have hope? Do you have any optimism for the future?
Well, I think I had a very good friend of mine used to see a couple of us that worked at the newspaper walking down the street to go to lunch or to go to the bar or something, and he would say, "Oh, it's the cynical newspaper people." And I would always kind of argue with him and say, I don't do this work because I'm cynical. I think I do it because I'm a bit of a romantic, and I think that that there is hope, and that you can see it every day if you were looking for it. A really smart young woman from West Virginia, Elaine Sheldon, who makes films about people in West Virginia who are finding hope. And I've learned a lot from her work and watching how she looks for people who are making change in West Virginia. And it really, when I was a kid, I loved Mr. Rogers, like so many people did. And he always tells you when something's bad is happening, look for the helpers. And so I think there's a lot of that you find a lot of people in West Virginia today that are trying to help. There are still too many people that are trying to have these same old arguments and these same old fights, these same old sorts of things where if you write a story that points out something negative, that you're destroying jobs or you're destroying the state. But no, I think there's hope. I think that we're, it's not always easy to find that hope, but I don't think West Virginia is done yet.
Ken Ward Jr., thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Ken Ward is an investigative journalist for the Charleston Gazette-Mail and ProPublica. What do you think about the future of Appalachia's coal and natural gas industries? Can you let us know on Twitter @UsThemPodcast or on the Us and Them Facebook page? You've been listening to Us and Them. Our team for this episode is me, Trey Kay, Loretta Williams, Chris Julin, Mitch Hanley, Kate Smith, and Eric Malinsky. Michael Lipton and Tristan Lozow wrote and performed the Us and Them show music. Mark Lerner designed our logo. The wonderful people at PRX and West Virginia Public Broadcasting make Us and Them possible. So do grants from the CRC Foundation and the Daywood Foundation. Us and Them was originally developed with assistance from the mentorship program at AIR, the Association of Independents in Radio. We'll see you next time on Us and Them.
Support for this podcast comes from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.